She was one of the most famous women in the world. 2 Academy Awards. A fitness empire that sold over 17 million copies. A household name for over 5 decades. And yet, behind all of it, behind every magazine cover and every standing ovation, there was a woman who once said she didn't think she was going to make it to 30. At 88 years old, Jane Fonda still wakes up haunted by a single memory. A night when she didn't go downstairs to say goodnight to her mother. A small, ordinary moment. Forgettable. Until it became the one thing she couldn't undo. Because the next morning, her mother was gone. And Jane didn't find out the truth of how she died by sitting down with her father. She didn't hear it from a family friend or a gentle phone call. She read it in a magazine. Alone. In a classroom. Surrounded by strangers. At 12 years old. That is where this story really begins. Not on a film set. Not at an Oscar ceremony. Not in a protest line in Vietnam. It begins with a little girl who never got a goodbye, who spent the next 76 years trying to fill a silence no amount of fame could ever touch. This is the story America never fully told about Jane Fonda. And it is far more devastating than anything you've seen on screen. She entered the world carrying a name that already meant something. Henry Fonda was not just a man in Hollywood. He was a presence. The kind of actor whose stillness on screen made audiences lean forward. But at home, that same stillness was something else entirely. It wasn't commanding. It was cold. It was distant. It was a door that never quite opened. Jane grew up inside a house that should have felt like privilege and mostly felt like performance. Everything had to be right. Everything had to be enough. And the standard for enough was always shifting just a little bit beyond her reach. She watched her father the way a child watches someone they are desperate to understand. She studied his silences. She tried to decode them. Was he disappointed? Was he uninterested? Was she simply not the kind of child he had imagined? There was no cruelty, not in the dramatic sense. There were no explosions. There was something quieter and in many ways harder. There was indifference dressed up as composure. Praise did not come easily. Warmth was measured. Affection arrived sharpened, disguised as correction. And the lesson young Jane took from all of this was not that she was unloved. It was that love had to be earned. That it was conditional. That it would only arrive if she got everything exactly right. That belief became the engine of her entire life. And it came with a cost she would be paying for decades. Her mother, Frances Ford Seymour, was a woman the world barely remembers. But to Jane, she was everything fragile and everything missing. Frances struggled. She battled mental illness in an era when that was not something you discussed. It was something you hid. Something you managed behind closed doors and polished appearances. When things became too difficult to manage, she was sent to a psychiatric clinic. The family was told she had a heart condition. That was the explanation given. That was the story Jane was expected to accept. Heart failure. End of conversation. No burial of emotions. No space for grief. The photographs of Frances came down from the walls. Her name stopped being spoken. It was as if she had simply evaporated. And then one afternoon, Jane was sitting in a classroom doing what 12-year-olds do. Flipping through a magazine. Half paying attention. Half somewhere else in her mind. And she turned a page. And she stopped. Because there it was, in print. In a sentence she read once and then again, because she couldn't believe it was real. Her mother had not died of heart failure. Her mother had taken her own life. Inside the psychiatric clinic. Alone. And no one had told her. No one had sat down with this child and said the truth out loud. She found out the way you might find out about a celebrity. Casually. In passing. In a room full of people who had no idea what she was reading. The room must have felt like it was dissolving. The ordinary sounds of school, the shuffle of papers, the distant hum of voices, all of it must have turned to static. And she sat there, alone inside that moment, with no one reaching for her, no one to tell her it was going to be all right, because no one even knew what she was reading. That is one of the most devastating images I can hold in my mind. A 12-year-old girl reading about her mother's suicide in a school magazine because no one in her family could find the courage to tell her the truth. She later said that the night before her mother died, she hadn't gone downstairs to say goodnight. It was a small thing. The kind of thing you don't even register in the moment. But after she read that article, that small thing became enormous. It followed her. If I had just gone downstairs, if I had just said goodnight, would it have mattered? Could one small gesture have changed everything? Rationally, the answer is no. A child's goodnight does not carry that kind of weight. But grief does not operate rationally, especially grief that arrives without warning, without explanation, and without a single person to help you process it. So she carried it. She carried it quietly, the way she would learn to carry so many things. She adapted. She built structure around herself. Discipline, control, perfection. If she could be perfect enough, maybe the world would hold. Maybe she wouldn't lose anything else. Maybe love would finally stay. That was the silent contract she made with herself at 12 years old. And she spent the next 7 decades honoring it, even when it was destroying her. Her father moved forward after Frances died. He remarried. Life continued. And Jane followed, because that was what the family did. You moved forward. You did not dwell. You did not grieve out loud. And so she learned to not grieve at all. She learned to convert pain into momentum, loss into discipline, emptiness into ambition. She would later say that she didn't know how to grieve because no one ever showed her how. And that quiet truth contains decades of silence within it. By the time she reached her 20s, Jane Fonda was already becoming something the world wanted to look at. She was striking in a way that went beyond conventional beauty. There was an intensity to her, something restless and searching that the camera seemed to sense. And Hollywood, being what Hollywood was and still is, saw that intensity and immediately started trying to shape it into something more commercially useful. She moved to Paris in her mid-20s and met Roger Vadim, a French filmmaker who had a particular gift for recognizing women who were still becoming themselves and offering to help them finish the process. He was older. He was experienced. He had already been married to Brigitte Bardot, and he saw in Jane something he wanted to be part of creating. She was still searching, still trying to figure out who she was supposed to be now that the childhood version of herself had been left behind. And Vadim had an answer. He had a vision. He wanted to make her a symbol, and so she became one. Barbarella, 1968, was not exactly a film you watch for its emotional depth, but it was watched by everyone. The image it created of Jane Fonda was global and instantly recognizable, and almost entirely at odds with the person who was still living somewhere underneath all of that. She became a symbol of sensuality, an icon of a very particular male fantasy. And she later said that she learned how to become what people wanted. She just didn't know how to feel like herself. That sentence tells you everything. She was performing becoming. She was so practiced at adjusting herself to meet external expectations that she no longer had a clear sense of where the performance ended and the person began. And that is an extraordinarily dangerous place to be. The eating disorder that developed during this period was not something she spoke about for a very long time. Because how do you explain that to a world that is celebrating your body? How do you say that the image everyone is applauding is the product of something deeply painful happening in private? She later described a cycle she fell into, hidden, repeated, driven not by vanity, but by a need for control. In a life where so much had been taken away without warning, where love was conditional and grief was forbidden, controlling what she ate and what her body looked like was one of the only things that felt like agency. She once said that she didn't like what she saw and didn't know how to change what she felt. And that is the gap that an eating disorder lives in. The feeling doesn't change just because the external appearance changes. It is never really about the body. It is always about something older and harder to reach. Hollywood did not help. She was given advice from industry figures who should have known better that she could reshape her face, alter her jaw, remove certain teeth to better fit the image that was expected of her. And she listened, not because she believed in it, but because she was still searching for approval in a place that could never give it to her. Every change she made was not transformation. It was negotiation. Is this enough now? And the answer never came. The mirror did not soften. No matter how close to perfect she appeared on the outside, something inside remained unsettled. She once said quietly that she didn't think she would make it to 30. And in that sentence is everything she had never shown the world. The success was real. The acclaim was real. But beneath it, she was fighting something that the red carpet could not see and the cameras could not reach. What saved her, or at least began to shift the trajectory, was the work itself. Not the glamour of it. The craft. She began choosing roles not because they made her look a certain way, but because they asked something true of her. They Shoot Horses, Don't They in 1969 was not a comfortable film. It was a film about exhaustion and despair and the grinding endurance of people who have nothing left but to keep going. And Jane did not simply portray that. She seemed to inhabit it. Every movement felt weighted. Every glance felt like it carried a history. She later said she wasn't trying to be beautiful. She was trying to understand what it means to hurt. That shift changed everything. Klute in 1971 gave her the first Oscar. A role that could have been played as surface only, but in her hands became something exposed and almost fragile. A woman seen by many, known by none. She stripped the illusion away and left behind something unguarded. The Academy recognized it. But more importantly, she recognized something in herself. She found that truth was available to her if she was willing to let go of the performance. Coming Home in 1978 is one of those films that stays with you. There are moments where the camera lingers, and she does not look like she is acting at all. She looks like she is remembering. The stillness, the hesitation, the way emotion surfaces and is then quietly held back. It feels lived, and it earned her the second Oscar. But more than that, it confirmed that she had made a choice. She was no longer chasing visibility. She was chasing meaning. That choice came with a price. Hollywood prefers comfort over confrontation. It prefers images it already understands. And Jane was increasingly becoming someone the industry couldn't fully contain or predict. So she did something remarkable. She started her own production company. Not for power, to protect meaning. She wanted to make films about war and healing and justice and identity. Stories that didn't flatter but revealed. She once said she wanted the work to mean something even if it made people uncomfortable. And she stood by that even when it cost her roles and support and the easy goodwill of an industry that does not like to be challenged. What looked like courage to the world often felt like isolation to her. But she kept going, because she had found something that the performance of perfection could never give her. She had found a reason. Then came Vietnam, and the photograph that would define her in the eyes of millions of people for the rest of her life. It is important to understand what was happening in America in the early 1970s when Jane Fonda made the decision to travel to Hanoi. The country was divided in ways that felt almost physical. Families argued at dinner tables. Friends stopped speaking. The war was not an abstraction. It was a daily reality for hundreds of thousands of American families who had sons and brothers and fathers in Southeast Asia, and who were watching those men come back broken or not come back at all. The anger was real, and it ran in every direction. Jane had been listening. To students, to veterans, to families who had lost people. She had been to hospitals and classrooms and community meetings. She was trying to understand something larger than herself. And she believed that going to Hanoi, seeing what was happening on the other side, might help her understand it better. She thought she was going there to learn. And then there was a moment. A camera. A fraction of a second. She was near military equipment. Her posture uncertain. Her expression misplaced. As if she herself was not sure she belonged in that frame. The shutter clicked. And that image traveled across the world. When it arrived in America, it did not arrive quietly. It landed like a detonation. Headlines hardened overnight. A name was given to her that would follow her for years, carried in mouths and printed in papers with a sharpness that cut far beyond criticism. Hanoi Jane. 2 words that collapsed everything she was into a single accusation. Traitor. Doors closed. Offers slowed. The backlash was not a wave. It was a constant, unrelenting, deeply personal. For many people, that image became the truth. Louder than context. Louder than explanation. And she tried to explain. She tried to clarify what she had meant and what she had not meant. But the moment had already been decided by the time she started speaking. And no one was listening. She later said she wished that moment had never happened. Not because of what she meant, but because of what it became. She did not deny the pain it caused. She did not minimize the anger of the veterans who felt betrayed. She stayed with it. She listened to the anger directly. She sat with the disappointment. And she responded the only way she knew how. Through the work. Coming Home was not just a film about veterans. It was closer to an answer. A space where the cost of war was not argued but felt. But some labels do not disappear. Hanoi Jane never fully left. Decades later, veterans still turned their backs on her at public events. Some refused to be in the same room. And she accepted it. She did not pretend it didn't sting. She understood something hard and true. That intention does not protect you from consequence. That truth does not guarantee you will be heard. What she lost in that moment was not just approval. It was control over her own story. And what she gained was something quieter and far more lasting. Direction chosen from within rather than validation given from outside. Her marriages tell a story of their own. 3 of them. Each one revealing a different layer of a woman who was always searching for something she couldn't quite name. Not fame. Not success. She had both. Something older. Something that went back to a house in Greenwich where a father's approval was always just out of reach and a mother's love had been taken away without explanation. Roger Vadim was the first. She was 27. Still searching. Still unsure. He saw something in her that he wanted to finish shaping. And she let him. For a time. Because in the beginning it felt like being seen. But being seen and being known are very different things. He saw what he could make of her. Not who she was underneath it all. Barbarella made her a global icon. And she felt completely disconnected from herself. Then came Vanessa. Born in 1968. And for a moment, motherhood felt like the thing that might finally anchor her. That might give her something solid to stand on. But the fear arrived alongside the love. She had never been shown how to be a mother who was fully present. Because she had grown up with a father who was rarely present and a mother who was taken away. She tried. She was there. But she later admitted she was there without really being there. A missed afternoon. A rushed goodbye. A child reaching out. And a mother already somewhere else in her mind. That particular admission, spoken years later with quiet honesty, carries more weight than almost anything else she has said publicly. Because it is the truth that doesn't make you look good. It is the truth you have to earn the right to speak. The marriage to Vadim ended in 1973. She left carrying her daughter, and a guilt she could not put down. She had chosen honesty over illusion. But honesty has a cost. She was both relieved and undone. Free, and yet completely uncertain about who she was without the roles she had spent years learning to play. Tom Hayden came next. An activist. A man rooted in protest lines and causes that carried urgency. And to Jane, at 35, already famous and already restless, and still looking for somewhere to belong, he felt like more than a husband. He felt like direction. Like a purpose that was larger than the self she was still trying to understand. She believed that maybe this was it. Maybe this was where she finally got to rest. But purpose does not hold a person together. Sometimes it pulls them apart. There were mornings when she didn't make it back in time. Nights when the house was quiet, but her mind was still elsewhere. A small hand reaching for her, and a hesitation she couldn't explain. She loved her son Troy. She loved him with everything she had. But she later said she didn't always know how to show up for him. And saying that out loud, years after the fact, with no defense and no excuse, is one of the most honest things a parent can do. The marriage lasted nearly 17 years. And when it ended in 1990, she had become something undeniable in public. But privately, she was carrying a truth she couldn't escape. That purpose can give you direction without giving you balance. That strength can carry you forward without bringing you home. Ted Turner arrived in 1991. He was vast. He was certain. He had built CNN and lived inside a world of scale and influence that most people can barely imagine. And he welcomed Jane into that world as if nothing could possibly be missing from it. Grand estates, private planes, a life that appeared complete from every angle. And for a while, it felt true. But beneath the elegance, something quieter was settling in. Not tension, not conflict, something harder to name. She described it later with a precision that is almost heartbreaking. A night standing beneath chandeliers, surrounded by voices and laughter and movement, smiling when expected, listening when spoken to, and yet no one really looking long enough to see her. She was there. She wasn't felt. Roger had tried to shape her. Tom had walked beside her in purpose. But here she was no longer being asked to grow, only to remain. Her voice was acknowledged but rarely needed. Her presence admired but not deeply engaged. And slowly, almost without noticing, she began to disappear again inside a life that looked flawless from the outside. She later said it was a kind, easy love. but something in her stayed out of reach. When the marriage ended in 2001, there was no explosion. No single moment. Just a realization that settled slowly, and then all at once. That even a life filled with everything can still leave you unseen. She left with wealth, with status, but more importantly with herself. Not adjusted, not reshaped, not negotiated. For the first time, she was not trying to fit into love or purpose or expectation. She was choosing herself, fully, without apology. In 2010, she was 72 years old when the doctor told her she had breast cancer. The tumor was removed, but the fear didn't go anywhere. It settled deep into places no surgery could reach. She later said that you learn quickly that healing is not the same as feeling safe. It stays with you. It changes the way you move through ordinary days. It makes you aware, in a very physical way, of how borrowed every moment is. In 2019, a lesion on her lip was diagnosed as skin cancer. Small, treatable, but unmistakable. The body was not asking to be ignored anymore. And then in 2022, she was 84 years old when she received the diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system. At an age when many people have already stepped back from everything, she stepped into chemotherapy. Not as a symbol, not as someone performing resilience for an audience, as a human being facing something she couldn't control and choosing to be honest about it so that others wouldn't feel so alone inside their own fear. She didn't hide it. She didn't dramatize it. She stood inside it. And she described what that was actually like with a specificity that cuts through everything. Sitting in a chair watching the slow drip of N4, each drop marking time in a way no clock ever could. Not rushing it. Not resisting it. Just learning how to stay. Her hand resting against a thin hospital blanket. The low hum of machines. The long hours that ask nothing of you except endurance. No cameras. No applause. Just presence and the weight of your own breathing. And at night, when everything falls quiet, she said the questions grow louder. Not about fame. Not about legacy. About time. About what was said and what was missed. I'm not afraid of dying, she admitted. I'm afraid of leaving things unfinished. That sentence sits differently when you hear it from someone who is 84 years old and sitting in a chemotherapy chair. Because she wasn't talking abstractly. She was talking about specific moments. Specific people. Conversations that ended too quickly. Birthdays she couldn't go back to. Moments she had meant to return to and never did. She went into remission. But the body carries its history. The knees resist. The spine bends. Memory occasionally hesitates where it once commanded. For a woman who had spent decades defining what strength looked like, this was a different kind of test. The kind that asks you not to push harder, but to accept what you cannot reverse. And perhaps the heaviest truth of all was not the pain. It was the solitude. Not the absence of love. The absence of presence. 3 marriages behind her. Children grown into lives of their own. A home filled with everything. And yet in the stillness of night, nothing that could sit beside her and share the weight of it. That particular loneliness, the loneliness of a full life in an empty room, is one that a lot of people will recognize. It is not the loneliness of having nothing. It is the loneliness of having arrived somewhere you worked your whole life to reach, and finding that the silence followed you there. And still she endured. Not with defiance. Not with noise. With something quieter and somehow stronger. She kept showing up, day by day, breath by breath. Because in the end, survival is not about winning. It's about staying. Today, at 88, Jane Fonda lives in Los Angeles in a way that is very deliberately different from anything that came before. She is done with scale. She is done with statement. Her Beverly Hills home, previously valued at around $13 million, is not defined by extravagance. It is defined by intention. Open glass lines, natural light, soft earth tones. A living room that opens into a calm, sun-filled space where nothing competes for attention. Books, photographs, carefully chosen pieces that replace excess. Before that, she owned a ranch in New Mexico that sold for close to $20 million. Vast desert horizons, uninterrupted silence, a place to disappear without getting lost. Each property marked a different phase of her becoming. Today she no longer needs space to escape, only space to exist. Her net worth is estimated to exceed $200 million, built across decades of film, television, fitness ventures, and disciplined financial choices. She owned classic luxury vehicles, Mercedes-Benz models, vintage Cadillacs, but no private jets, no yachts, no collection designed to signal power. She once reflected that she didn't want money to define her. She wanted it to give her options, and those options shaped everything. Where she lived, what she chose to create, what she refused to compromise. What she chose to do with that wealth may matter more than how she earned it. Through her foundation and decades of advocacy, she has directed millions toward causes that mirror her own lived experience. Supporting young people who are lost, advancing women's rights, confronting climate change with a consistency that goes far beyond the gestures of celebrity. Her work with adolescents in Georgia is not performative. It is personal. It is rooted in her understanding of what it feels like to be invisible, to search for worth in places that cannot give it, to carry questions no one has answered. Even in her 80s, she placed herself at risk of arrest at climate demonstrations. Not for attention, because stepping back would have contradicted everything she had come to believe. And her relationship with Grace and Frankie, the Netflix show that ran for 7 seasons, reintroduced her to a generation that didn't know her from Barbarella or Coming Home. It showed them someone still evolving, still finding things worth saying, still showing up. Professionally, she no longer works to maintain relevance. She participates when it aligns with purpose. That is a distinction that takes a very long time to earn. Her health is managed with equal discipline, regular screenings, specialist care, movement that works with the body rather than against it. She has said she is not resisting age. She is learning to work with it. And there is something in that particular surrender, the surrender that is not defeat but acceptance, that contains more wisdom than almost anything else she has said. What has changed most is what she has not talked about for most of her life: the relationship with her children. Vanessa Vadim, thoughtful and grounded, chose a quieter path as a filmmaker and activist, deliberately staying outside the machinery that once shaped her mother. Troy Garrity stepped into acting, building a career defined not by spectacle, but by steadiness. And today, their connection is no longer shaped by distance. It is shaped by truth. The conversations that once didn't happen have. The apologies that once felt impossible were spoken. She had to learn how to apologize, she has said, not just for specific mistakes, but for choices she thought were necessary. For the absences she rationalized. For the times she was there in body, but not in presence. That kind of apology, the one that doesn't make excuses and doesn't seek absolution, is extraordinarily difficult. It requires you to look at what you did clearly without softening it. And it requires you to accept that you cannot go back and undo it. You can only show up differently going forward. And that is what she did. Trust was not restored with gestures. It was restored with presence, with listening, with staying. And over time, something shifted. Not perfection, understanding. There is room now for laughter and silence and honesty that does not need to be managed. For a woman who once feared she had missed too much, this quiet restoration carries more weight than any public achievement ever could. She has said she has learned to be with herself without needing to escape. And that may be the most difficult transformation of all. Not becoming stronger, not becoming louder, not becoming more visible, becoming still. Learning to sit inside your own life without running from it, without filling it with noise or performance or the next version of yourself that you're convinced will finally be enough. The silence that used to terrify her now has a different quality. It is no longer the silence of absence. It is the silence of someone who has finally arrived somewhere and does not need to leave. What Jane Fonda's life reveals, when you look at all of it honestly, is something most stories about famous people refuse to say out loud. That success and pain are not opposites. That you can be celebrated and invisible at the same time. That you can have everything the world calls valuable and still wake up in the middle of the night reaching for something no one has been able to give you. And that healing, if it comes at all, does not look like triumph. It looks like a quiet Tuesday. It looks like a conversation with your adult child that you thought would never happen. It looks like finally being able to sit in a room without performing for it. She did not live perfectly. She made choices that divided people. She had moments she cannot undo. She carried wounds from childhood all the way into her 80s and had to learn late how to put some of them down. But she kept becoming. That is the word that matters here. Becoming. Not arrived. Not finished. Not resolved. Still in the process of turning into whoever she is next. And at 88 years old, that is something worth paying attention to. Because most people stop becoming long before they run out of time. Jane Fonda never did. Her story is not about an icon. It is about a person who survived a childhood that broke her in ways the world never saw. Who built a career out of a need to be seen. Who made choices that cost her things she could not get back. Who walked through illness and solitude and regret and came out the other side not victorious. Not unscathed. Just still here. Still present. Still willing to be honest about what she doesn't know and what she got wrong and what she is still trying to figure out. And maybe that is why, even now, she resonates with people who have nothing in common with her. Not the fame. Not the wealth. Not the Academy Awards or the aerobics videos or the protest lines. What resonates is the searching. The private conversation that never quite stops. The one where you ask yourself whether you were enough, whether you showed up, whether the people you love know it, whether you can still fix the things that need fixing before it is too late. She has been asking that question her whole life. And she is still here. Still asking. And that, more than anything else, is what makes Jane Fonda's story impossible to look away from.